we'll start with you, Misha.
Yep. Hey everyone. So I'm currently a security engineering manager at Semgrep, helping to lead the supply chain security research team. I have been in security for almost a decade now. I've worked in different areas, including detection and response, incident response, infrastructure security, cloud security. And before Semgrep, I was at Sentry helping to build out the DNR team there. And before that, I was at Cloudflare, working to help protect the production environment. So the, environment that's helping to run Cloudflare's network. Yeah, very excited to be here.
Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. My name is Greg Anderson. I'm the founder and CEO at DefectDojo. And what we're up to at DefectDojo is making security scalable and working to consolidate results to have one actionable list. And so I'm excited to be here with Misha. And today we're going to talk about why high quality security results matter in our programs.
Yeah.
You're on mute
Yeah.
if you want to kick off the questions.
Sorry about that. Yes, I was just saying, we are going to kick this off with, we have a few questions to get going. And Greg, do you want to kick off with the first question?
Sure, yeah. So the first question is, what makes high quality security results and why are they hard to accomplish?
Yeah, I can start this one. So what makes results high quality and why is it hard to accomplish? I would say that the quality of the data that you're starting with, that you're using to build security alerts on, if the quality of the data is low, then I think that will lead to low quality results or alerts. There are a lot of tools out there that are very noisy. And I think for me as a security engineer, I really want results that are actionable, that will help me focus on the riskiest areas in the environment, whatever that may be. And I think it's kind of a very tailored approach, depending on, what kind of data you have, what your exposure is. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of work and effort being put into contextualizing alerts as well, which I think can make a big difference in how actionable the results are.
And Greg, what's your thoughts on this issue?
For me, when I think about what makes results high quality, I think about results that are easy to action, results that don't repeat themselves. So for example, reporting an issue once rather than 100 times. I think it's important to have all the information too that you need to act. If you're just providing an alert without the means to mitigate that alert, I don't think you're going to get the outcome that you're looking for. And then what I think makes this really difficult is the breadth that we have to cover as security professionals. I think it's very easy to be an expert in one area, but when we look at the breadth, which I think is very, very unique to security, it can be extremely challenging to get high quality results, not just in one area of security, but across the entire board to make sure that you're protecting your organization properly and providing ample coverage, not just in one area, but all areas.
Okay, and
yeah, I think
sorry, Misha.
Yeah, I was going to add that we both kind of gave perspectives as security professionals or engineers, but we're also both, at security vendors. So kind of wanted to build off of that and get your perspective on what are some of the challenges that vendors actually face.
I think one of the big challenges is security is seen as a cost center compared to, say, like a revenue generating center, if you will. So unfortunately, both vendors and people that are using tools from vendors have to sort of justify their existence, what can be difficult compared to revenue generating activities. At the end of the day, I think if you can focus on the risk and what you're protecting, and even putting a quantifiable amount to what a product stands to lose, even if it's just a guess. I think that really helps to justify and get the traction that we need. I think the other thing that really is holding back our industry is lack of innovation with technology. So when we look at even some of the tools that are popular today that were popular when I was pen testing 10 years ago, there hasn't been a ton of innovation in terms of how security tools detect things. They're still, for the most part, just parsing responses rather than, innovating and truly testing the application in a way that's more meaningful, say like direct interaction with JavaScript, rather than just looking at request response.
Yeah, I feel like vendors are starting to play with the idea of contextualizing alerts like across different log sources. If you're looking at like detection and response tools, for example, but the data has been around for a long time. Like if you look at some vendors, they've had access to the data for a long time. So, I mean, I'm glad it's going in that direction, but I agree with you. There's kind of a lack of innovation there to do something kind of different. One of the challenges sorry, one of the challenges that we face as a vendor is balancing, we're building rules as a, for supply chain, and it's a challenge to kind of catch instances of a vulnerability, for example, and be specific about it so that it's not generating a lot of noise, but also that it's broad enough that we're able to catch different instances of it across a wide set of customers. So be balancing like being generic enough, but also not too generic in our approach.
Okay, and on to our next topic. And Greg, will throw this to you first. What impact do you think low quality results have on dev teams? So if we're looking at our colleagues and not just in the security professional realm.
Yeah, I think where to start. So at the end of the day, the unfortunate reality is if work can be shifted, because everyone I think is under a lot of pressure these days, it can be. And so if you aren't delivering results that are actually actionable, then that is a great excuse to essentially ignore them. I think when it comes to building trust within an organization to actually get security issues resolved, delivering things that aren't actionable or aren't helpful is the quickest way to ruin a reputation. And once that's damaged, that can be really hard to restore. The other thing that I think about is when you aren't producing great results or you aren't scanning everything, you can't truly know what the risks are to your company, because if you don't have that complete perspective, you can't prioritize properly. Yeah, I think that's really the keys. I think number one, above anything else, it's a reputational risk, which in turn turns into an executional risk. But I also think that you have to be able to scan everything in a meaningful way to truly know what your risks are.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Trust and reputation is kind of everything in security. And that doesn't change if your customers are internal instead of external. You don't want to burn out your partners internally as well. One thing that really worked for me in the past is sort of embedding your pipeline, your alerts pipeline, into whatever your dev teams are using. So if they're responding and triaging their alerts in Jira or, in Slack, I don't like Slack for triaging alerts necessarily, but if they are, kind of meet them where they're at and make it easy for them to look at something and quickly be able to make, a determination. We also have used the same kind of like monitoring tools. So for example, at Cloudflare, we had infrastructure alerts and SRE already had Grafana and a couple other monitoring tools in place to check for like the impact on servers. And so we had to use their existing tools for monitoring how our detections were performing. And so that kind of helped build trust between the two teams. And so when we had alerts for our infrastructure, it was much easier to get them to respond and take it seriously.
Agreed. Yeah, super interesting point. So in my experience, in the days when I was still generating pen test reports, I would be lucky if I could get someone to look at those findings once, and typically it would require begging. And when you push things to where developers actually work, like just their natural backlogs, Jira, Slack, GitHub, etc., our data says they interact with it 12x more. So it's definitely a major shift in dynamic that may even be more important than the actual results is where you ship them to.
Would you say that security tools are actually built for like the dev teams, like not necessarily the security engineers almost?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think we've seen a really interesting thing go on in the industry where security tools are started to be marketed toward developers more. Um, I think sometimes that goes a little too far because it just depends on how organizations are structured and the prioritizations. But I think ultimately, um, it's very, very difficult to be successful in pushing security responsibilities onto developers, at least in my experience.
Fair enough.
All right, thanks. So if there's no more on that topic, we'll move on. This one's for you, Misha, first. What are the costs to a business of not having the right tools and platforms in place?
Yeah, I mean, security, like, any other thing is kind of it's an investment. And there's a perception that it is a cost center. We're not actively necessarily building features that get more customers onboarded to our platform or using our tool. But security teams play a very important role in the reputation of the company. But in order to kind of see a return on the security efforts, it can take multiple years. So in order to get support across the business, for all of those years to kind of see a return on that, you have to be very judicious and intentional about where you're investing and where you're asking the business to invest, right? And so having that decision or like, at the point of the decision where you're picking which tools to use, it can be very detrimental, I think, to the reputation of the security team if you're not going with the right tools that make sense given like the skill set of the team, what you're actually trying to identify in your environment. Like more tools does not mean better security. And sometimes it can be very tempting to build something instead of buy, but yeah, so there are many different approaches. But yeah, I think I would say there's a lot of OpEx costs associated with it, and it takes time to see the returns.
Greg?
Where to start? So I think when you pick the right tools, you can prevent breaches without question. I think when we think about, programs holistically, it's important that you have as much information about your organization as you can. I can't think of a job in which I was the security engineer and the requirements didn't change, shall we say, about a year in, give or take. So when you have low quality results, you run an internal reputational risk, I would say, to the effectiveness of your program. Whereas when you don't have the right coverages or the right tools to meet that coverage, you create an external risk, specifically with your attack surface area, specifically with getting breached. The reality is good security tools are expensive, but they're still, 20x less than what a single breach would cost. And so that is how I have argued for better budgets in the past because the reality is no business wants to spend money that they don't have to, right? And so they must be compelled. You have to put together a convincing argument on one tool versus the other. And I think that comes down to coverage, utility, and value. I think the other thing that's just really hard to quantify is things that didn't happen, if you will. You can't really, it's difficult to
Yeah.
negative. Um, and so I would look back to trying to quantify um, the key areas of the business and what a breach would have when we look at the cost of tools. And typically, I think you'll find it's around, 1/20th, the program costs 1/20th with respect to tools rather than what a breach would cost for key pieces of the organization.
I agree that it's hard to quantify what you caught. And yeah, it's a kind of a thankless role in that way, but you get more attention when something does go wrong. And I'm curious if there was anything that worked for you in the past to try to show the effectiveness of making the right decision, picking the right tool or platform. Did you have to build reports that showed everything that you caught and the risks, if we didn't catch them and things like that?
I think it's a really tough balance, right? Because if you're spending time doing that, which is hyper important, you're not spending time protecting the organization. And if your resources are already maxed, I think a mistake that's very easy to make is to say, I'm going to focus all of my time on protecting and none of my time on reporting. And so before founding DefectDojo, I think I had about 6 or 7 security engineering roles, give or take. And I think 2 of those we were successful in proving and showing reporting. And what it came down to is monitoring attack surface area logs. So when we saw a specific type of attack come in, we would then go in and say like, oh, look, we fixed issues around that a couple of weeks ago. At one organization, we even went as far as tying app data into our SIM, which gave us incredible alerting potential to know when someone would really should get woken up in the middle of the night and when it was okay to sleep. So if you had a Microsoft vulnerability against a Microsoft server that we knew was vulnerable from our app and infrastructure testing, then that was something that needed to get escalated. But if you saw, an attack on a Windows-based system when the system was, Linux in nature, then, you probably shouldn't get woken up. But sometimes, or most times, Sims and all the systems around them don't have that context unless you give them that context, unless you create that context and make it available for consumption.
Okay, moving on to the next. Misha, this will go to you first. What does the end state look like when you actually have the right results and the right program in place?
Yeah, I think end state, I am biased towards tools that help me be proactive versus reactive. So in the end state, if I am able to, I would look at like how many incidents we're dealing with versus how many incidents we were able to prevent, that we were able to catch before it turned into like a full-on incident, or if it's in the case of like vulnerabilities, were we able to effectively work with our dev teams or product engineering teams to fix a vulnerability that's high or critical, versus getting it caught versus the vulnerability getting caught a different way. Yeah, so I think that's something that I would be biased towards. But I also think it depends. The end state with the right results and program, I think it just depends on what kind of environment you're working with, what data you have to protect. Do you have a lot of does your company have a lot of servers and hardware that you have to think about? That's going to look very different versus, for a company that's built in built in like GCP or AWS. Yeah, I think it's a very, like one size does not fit all, from my experience in security.
Right?
I think that when we look at what reporting gets to leadership, there's often some KPIs that are tied to security. And so when we're implementing anything, whether it's rolling out a new tool or using a new technique to achieve higher levels of automation, which I think is just sort of another key piece for any security program success is reaching certain levels of automation. The other thing that I want to achieve beyond KPIs is a better working environment for those people that are doing the testing and those individual contributors that are responsible for ultimately making that program happen. And so, without automation, I think you can have extremely long days in a job that is near impossible. And my hope in terms of the tools that you choose to leverage and the processes that you choose to roll out is that you get to a better working environment that is judged by how much leisure time that you have. So at Rackspace, when we started to embrace automation, we used to have our internal KPI of how much foosball time we got to play. And so although the metrics to leadership are important, I think there's also key things that I want to achieve for the team, just in terms of trying to lighten the burden that is a security program.
Okay, and when you're
Um,
thinking about end state, I mean, I think you answered this a little bit, Greg, but there's the end for the business and also the end for the team, and maybe ultimately for the external customers of the organization. And do you think the best programs address all three of those, or is one more important than the other?
Misha, do you want to answer that first? Do you want me to take a stab?
no, you can go for it. Yeah.
I think they're all very important, and I think they're all harmonious to a certain extent. Um, sometimes you have to make incredible efforts to achieve those KPIs, but I hope that to a certain extent, one sort of facilitates and makes the others necessary for the longevity of the program and the people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like KPIs don't, always tell the whole story. And I think it's important to kind of be intentional about what metrics you choose, because they're, you're setting up incentive structures for your organization, and you want to make sure that uh, uh, you're sort of encouraging the right behavior. For example, like I think for detection and response teams, like to see the health of the team, it often can seem like an easy pick to just go with the number of detections that you have, but that kind of just doesn't pay attention to the quality of those detections. And sometimes it takes longer to write. It does take longer to write higher quality detections and tie it across different sources and add automation for it. So I think that's just like a pitfall for KPIs and metrics that, yeah.
It's super interesting too, because it can change with maturity. And so one really interesting question to like ask security leaders was what Misha was saying is more alerts good or bad? Right? Like ideally you would see alerts potentially trend down if you're doing things correctly. But when you bring in a new tool, you may want to see alerts trend up to know that that tool is actually working and providing value. And so yeah, the data is really interesting in terms of how you choose to look at it. Two different leaders can look at the same KPI and interpret it differently.
That's very true.
Something that feels unique to security, or fairly unique at least.
Okay, our last topic is one that we probably could spend an entire hour on, but we're gonna try to address it in relation to results. But so going beyond results, how do we address the whole idea of AI and security? For example, how do we enhance data further with threat intelligence or in an AI? Is AI the answer to all of our security woes? And what perhaps are the near term and long term impacts of AI? So Greg, you're kicking this one off.
Oh, that's a fun one. Okay, I want to separate threat intelligence and AI first. And so I do think there is sort of a race right now going on in security for who can produce the best threat intelligence feed and make that actually applicable to security testing. And so when we look at the different frameworks, I think EPSS is a standout. If you're not familiar with EPSS, it's a scoring system that's based on real world exploitation. So they're giving you data on the likelihood of exploit um, directly from the real world. And while I think that's incredible and they're sort of a standout, the one I think hole in that is just because something isn't being exploited yet doesn't mean it won't be exploited next week. And so it's a landscape that can change more rapidly than the security team to react to. So I do think you have to look at multiple factors, even just using classic things like CVSS scoring in parity with EPSS. And then on the AI front, we are sort of leading more into the machine learning space rather than going to the full-blown answer of generative AI. I think when it comes to the testing of security things, that will always be difficult for AI just due to the breadth that you need. And also because when you train models, um, and we look at how we think about security results, 90% isn't good enough. You have to be hyper accurate and hyper sure across a number of different topics that have totally different inputs and outputs and behaviors. When you look at just even take very simple vulnerabilities, SQL injection versus cross-site scripting. You have to treat them totally separately from a data and a modeling perspective. I think AI is hyper interesting in the remediation space. I think post-testing, it's a lot easier to get the results that you'd hope for out of models that remove more and more of human input.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to actually one of the points that you made. I was going to ask, do you think like red teaming and pen testing is kind of an area that's just uh like waiting to be do you think there are strong AI use cases in those areas? Because if you use ChatGPT, you give it some code and you're like, hey, find me the vulnerability in this code. It hasn't been like a bad experience, and I know we're kind of early on as well, so I'm kind of curious to hear what you think, what that could evolve to in a few years.
I think there is a use case, but I don't know if it will get to the point where it is accurate as we need it to be on the testing side. I've seen really exciting things in the remediation space, in the insight space. So, like post finding the issue, what information is relevant, how exploitable is it, how do you fix it? I think enhancing the core findings after testing is where I expect there will be the most success. I think detecting is more challenging. And so I think there could be value in that side, but I don't know if we'll get all the way to the point where that is the only answer or something we can rely on exclusively for the protection of organizations and teams.
Yeah, I think for detection specifically, ML seems to be a better fit than AI. I mean, it's almost like statistics. It's you're analyzing data, trying to find anomalies, and detection teams in the past, like before ML was becoming more of like a mainstream thing. Like picking one behavior or like a one match on one field for a specific type of log, that sounds very different to me than having somebody who could help with building like a model, analyzing data in a historically, and helping you understand what the anomalies in behavior are and things like that. So I think machine learning could be very exciting, at least in the area of detection and response. But each area of security kind of has its own like potential with AI and ML.
And so for each of your companies, how do you see, I mean, short or long-term AI impacting your product, if at all?
Greg, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, we are continuing to look at where it makes sense to leverage AI and machine learning, specifically post discovery, which uh, who would have thought aligns with the view, right? So
Yeah.
when we look at things like deduplication, which we already respect human input on, like our deduplication um, takes human input into consideration and changes over time how it behaves. Uh, we see, but we aren't going all the way to saying, oh, the machine is telling you the best algorithm. I think the challenge in training models for AI that goes across organization is maybe the barrier, because when a specific detection is a false positive, it's highly dependent on the technology, the tool, the company, their specific implementation around those technologies as well. And so maybe that is the barrier that will be hard to break through is creating AI that goes across company and gives you the results that you're looking for. But when you can do sort of internal model training on specific companies, we've seen that as producing better results, especially in the long term for customers.
Yeah, we're also so we actually just spun up like a AI task force internally to really dive deeply into how we can incorporate AI into our platform. And we're also focusing on the like post finding, post alert stages to help customers review, triage, and remediate our Semgrep findings. So I think it's fairly, kind of early. It's in the experimental stages. Sometimes customers actually aren't willing to turn on the AI capabilities because they don't want, exposure in that way. So I'm not sure how that's going to kind of play out long term. But I think we're seeing a lot of like positive signals for customers, being able to use AI in their triage and review stages. I think like, if there's like a code vulnerability, it can give you a suggestion on the fix. It can even assess whether it's actually a false positive and make that suggestion for you. I don't know if like I've seen AI and security tools that are mature enough where you don't have to sort of have someone double check what it's suggesting though. I don't know if it's, I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. Are there any, I think that's our last official question. Before we maybe have Greg and Misha summarize, are there any questions from the audience? And it can be about what we talked about the products, anything that any other topics you're interested in while you have these experts here. Okay. Well, I guess you guys did a really good job and covered everything perfectly. So we don't have questions. So we can wrap it up if maybe each want to give just a little summary of what you want people to take away from this discussion. As they go back, put their security practitioner hats on, what should they be thinking about when they're looking at results and selecting tools?
I can go first. Yeah, I think my key takeaways would be don't be afraid to kind of like push the boundaries of what it means to have high quality results. I think it's very tempting to build like the easiest kind of detection or uh, throw the problem to like your dev teams to respond and just let them figure it out. But I would say pushing yourself to build these high quality like alerts or rules or detections or whatever it is will pay out in the long term. And actually, like I would rather find 10 very real security issues than just feel good about identifying 20 like maybe not so great findings. And so if it's a pure numbers game, I would be more thoughtful about that.
So you don't put the informational findings in your reports? Is what you're saying?
Yes, tune out the info. Yeah, info alerts. Yeah,
That's very fair. Yeah,
great advice, right?
I'm
Key
flashing back
takeaway.
the days where I was honestly padding my metrics, and Misha's very right. I shouldn't have padded my metrics, but I did. I did. If
It's
I'm
a very different game as a pen tester. Yeah.
Uh, I think tools for me just all comes down to utility. I think about what coverage does a tool give you for your organization. So, when you're building a program and rolling it out, I'm thinking about, 100% coverage. How do I get to 100% coverage? Because if you're not scanning everything, then you can't know where your risks are. And for me, that comes down to utility. But so, once you scan everything, you have to get it to a place where it's actionable, where it is high quality. Um, and then beyond that, just getting the findings in the developer's hands in a way that they actually like to work rather than more traditional reporting. That's sort of, I think the key takeaways and the key challenges that I think about with building programs today, and ultimately getting to a place where you have a mature program and high quality results to work with.
Okay, great. Well, Greg and Misha, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.